Today I'm going to talk to you about human nutrition. And this is a really fun lecture, but it's a lecture that's loaded with some baggage. Because when we look at human nutrition, the first way that we started understanding what humans need, and arguably what cats and dogs and all of the animals around us need, is that they need those four big organic molecules: proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. So we started from this understanding that if you're missing any of those, let's say you're missing proteins, then the organism, whether it's a cat, a dog, a cow, a human, whatever it is, will not grow and behave and be as expected. So we started from those organic molecules, and here organic really does refer to having carbon atoms. Now when we get into talking about agriculture, there is a type of farming called organic farming, and that refers to the types of practices that are used when growing the plants and even growing the animals for consumption. So in this lecture, we're focusing on the organic molecules that have carbon atoms, and they're great big molecules. The whole point of a digestive system down in here is to break those large molecules into their smaller bits, break them into their monomers. So for carbohydrates, the monomer of a carbohydrate is something called a monosaccharide. The prefix mono means one, and saccharide, whether it's saccharar or saccharide, that ending saccharide means sugar. And one thing that linguists have done is they have traced that ending saccharide through multiple language all the way back to the Sanskrit to discover that it has always meant sugar. And I love that consistency in humans when we can have an abstract representation, a word that throughout changes in language, throughout all of the generations of humans that we've had, always refers to something, and in this case, saccharide always refers to sugar. So a monosaccharide is just one little sugar. Our body loves monosaccharides. They're easy to use by the cells. When we get to chapter 4 and we talk about plant physiology, we're going to talk about how glucose is used most commonly in aerobic cellular respiration. So we love monosaccharides. Almost all of our carbohydrates represent fast energy. Easy to break apart into those small monomers and use those monomers to make ATP and other energy molecules to do all the stuff that we need our cells, our tissues, our organs, and our whole body to be able to do. Now, some of our carbohydrates will be they'll be stronger molecules. So we look at things like cellulose. Cellulose is a bunch of monosaccharides all bonded together into a really straight polysaccharide, a really straight polymer. Great big molecule and super, super, super sturdy. So when we're looking at trees, when we're looking at this desk, the paper and the books, all of that is composed of cellulose molecules, cellulose carbohydrates. And maybe it's been a while since you've eaten paper. Maybe you remember that eating paper didn't necessarily mean that you got energy. Like it would sit there in your stomach and it would come out the other end pretty unchanged. So cellulose does not get changed by our bodies. Our bodies can't break it into monosaccharides very easily. This is why we prefer things like sucrose, table sugar, why we prefer all of those polysaccharides that are easy to break apart. We do need some polysaccharides that are straight and big and won't cross the cell membrane in our large intestine. That insoluble fiber gives something for our intestines to squeeze against when they're doing that rhythmic peristaltic contraction of one muscle, one muscle, one muscle, one muscle, one muscle, one muscle, until the end and everything comes out. So we do need some of it, but most of the time we're after those really, really nice monosaccharides. Nice polysaccharides that are easy to break apart to get into the monosaccharides and use as immediate energy. So one of the things that we notice is that humans and a lot of animals and organisms prefer carbohydrates. They actively seek out those sugars. And so when we look to nature and we watch how animals are behaving, we will see them selectively go after things like fruit. Now, if you're ever out hiking in the North Woods or in the East Coast or a place where there's a lot of bears and it's blueberry season, or it's thimbleberry or raspberry season, you know when you're walking through a patch of those to be extra careful, because those bears are going to actively go after those sugars. They love them. The birds love the sugars. Everybody loves plants that make lots of sugars. So we're not alone in this desire for sugar. Our bodies can use it so easily. Now, the other thing that our bodies will crave, interestingly, will be lipids. Now, remember, lipids have two monomers that have to come together, that glycerol group and the fatty acid chain. During our legume unit, we did experiment with lipids, discovering that the double bond in the fatty acid chain made that fatty acid chain kinked, and we called the whole lipid unsaturated. That lipid was liquid or fluid at room temperature and easier for our bodies to handle. Saturated lipids do not have the double bond between the carbon. Every carbon is full of hydrogen. It forces that molecule to be straight. When that molecule is straight, it packs really tightly together and it's hard to break apart. So saturated lipids do have some benefit, but our bodies treat them differently because of that straight fatty acid chain. So lipids have tons and tons of atoms, lots of bonds between those atoms. This is why lipids tend to be a great way to store energy for a long period of time. And if you're an organism like a bear that's getting ready to hibernate, or you're a bird getting ready to migrate, you're going to actively seek out those lipids, because lipids will have lots of energy per unit. So you don't have to eat as much to get as many calories, get as much energy. And when you're going to do something like not eat for a bunch of months like a bear, or you're going to migrate for thousands of miles like a bird, you're going to need all of that energy. So animals and organisms across our planet specifically seek out sugars and lipids. Now, this brings me to the topic of donuts. Donuts are essentially flour, a little bit of flavor, but lipids and sugar. And this is why we crave them. Our cells, our bodies, and if we were to look at all animals, cells and bodies, crave lipids and sugars. So it's no wonder that we go gaga over donuts and baked goods, cupcakes and cookies and yum. It has the two things that all of our cells are craving. Now, the other thing, of course, that we've talked a lot about, especially when we were talking about the grasses, is we talked about proteins. When it comes to proteins, our monomer is the amino acid, and our bodies can make about 11 of the 20 amino acid monomer types, but there are 9 that our bodies can't make on their own, and those are the 9 that we need to consume in our diet. So this is where we get that classification of complete or incomplete protein. So we want to seek out those complete proteins or combinations of protein types that give us all 9 of those amino acid monomers that our cells can't make. Our cells can make the other 11 from the other things that we're consuming in our diet. Proteins have so many different functions inside of our body. A lot of times we think of proteins as being muscle, but proteins are absolutely crucial when we look at cell functioning. Inside of the cell, they're used to send signals. They're used to be receptors in the cell membrane, picking up on signals outside of the cell. They're the protein rods. They're so many things inside of a cell. So it's not just the big, bulky, muscular flesh that we think about with proteins. It's so many other things that a protein can function. So we're really focusing in this class on carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Nucleic acids, the monomer is a nucleotide, and the 2 main nucleic acid polymers will be DNA, deoxyribose nucleic acid, and RNA, ribose nucleic acid. Interestingly, we're not going to focus much on those organic molecules. From our point of view, we want to look at how plants and people are related through their body, through human body physical needs. So what I brought for you today is a delicious sampling of some of those plant products that will have those proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates in different amounts. So when we look at the carbohydrates, a lot of times we start with something like pasta. And if you remember, pasta is made from wheat, most of it, though we do have some gluten-free pasta made from some of our other plant products and grasses. When I look at the back and I look at the label, what I notice is that this is not 100% pure carbohydrates. Pasta has 1 gram of fat per serving, 2 grams of sugar specifically, and we've got 7 grams of protein. So even though we've been taught, or maybe have learned, that this is like pure carbohydrate, there's actually a mix of those molecules in the pasta that we are eating. So we've got some carbohydrates represented here by pasta. We also have some carbohydrates here represented by Fritos. And this is another perfect combination. Fritos have the simplest ingredients: corn, oil, salt. By mixing those 3 things together, you get this crispy, crunchy, delicious thing. So why, if this only has 3 ingredients, is this, and one of those ingredients, the corn oil itself, is an unsaturated lipid, which is considered healthier for our body, why is this considered so unhealthy? One of the problems is that when we eat Fritos, it's hard to eat just 1. It's hard to eat just 3. Part of that is by design. I don't know if you're familiar with how nutritional scientists come up with some of these amazing products that are simultaneously delicious and never quite satisfying. But what they do is they work on these combinations of sugar and salt and spices. They want to bring you right to the point of being delicious, but never fully satisfying your taste buds or satisfying your appetite. This keeps you eating them over and over and over and over again. They bring you to the brink, but they don't bring you to satisfaction. So the idea of eating just 1 serving size, which is 32 chips, that doesn't always seem very feasible once you've gotten into it, and your body just keeps saying, but I want more of that salt, I want more of the lipids, I want more of that corn crunch. It's hard to eat just 32 chips. When we look down at the nutritional facts, we see that there is some calcium in here, but that's it. There's no vitamin D, there's no potassium, there's none of those micronutrients that our body needs and craves in order for the cells to be able to function. Now, some of these things like vitamins, like vitamin D, are going to be coenzymes. They're going to lock into an enzyme protein, help change its shape, and allow that enzyme to be able to do its function. So if I had a diet of just Fritos, that's all I ate today, I would be missing the micronutrients. I would be missing those vitamins and minerals that my body needs, my enzymes inside of my cells need to be able to function. If enough of my cells can't function, the tissue starts to malfunction, the organ starts to malfunction, and I start to get some of those diseases like you're studying in your vitamin K study. So that's why the emphasis is really on things like fresh fruits and vegetables. Not only do we get more of the insoluble fiber that our large intestine needs, but inside of these types of products we have lots of those micronutrients. Now, one of the things that I want you to gain out of this class is to know that whenever you are looking at something that is orange or reddish in color, that what you have is you have a higher proportion of vitamin A. If you remember back to rice in the grass chapter, one of the things that's problematic is that if you're not getting enough vitamin A, you can have some serious side effects, including problems with your vision. And what researchers had done was genetically modified rice to have that gene to make it to produce vitamin A. That made the rice kind of an orange color, and it gave it the name golden rice. So we're always looking for those plant products that have that orange or red color because that indicates to us that there's a high amount of vitamin A. And what I love about most plant products is that we don't have to just go for one vitamin when we're chowing on them. There's going to be a lot of other micronutrients and potentially other macronutrients as well. Which brings me to the avocado. I love avocados. The avocado, the pepper, the tomato, these are all berries. It's a type of fruit. And we'll learn about that in the fruit lecture and lab. But I just wanted to introduce to you today that all of these are berries, though this doesn't remind us or make us think of a berry. The green, beautiful flesh of an avocado has a lot of lipids. a lot of unsaturated lipids. For a while there, it was really trendy to take the avocado and make things like custards and ice creams. And maybe your brain is going, whoa, no, you do not make this savory avocado sweet. This can't become a dessert. But because it has that ratio of lipids and a relatively mild flavor, it can take on the flavor of other things like custards and ice creams. And so it could be the basis or take the place of a fat like butter when we are making those products. The other reason why I wanted to bring up the avocado, not just because it's considered a berry, even though it doesn't look like a berry, and that its lipids allow us to use it in multiple unusual ways that you may not have seen before, but also because the avocado represents a dilemma. Most of the avocados are being grown in Mexico and Peru, and these I know came and were sourced from Peru. The avocados that are coming from Mexico, here we get this really strange and there's an uncomfortable conflict. Our demand for avocados has increased, and growers in Mexico had to plant the trees, and it's about 15 years before you start to get some fruit off of those avocado trees. So they started planting the trees, and then the fruit started coming in. Well, the fruit can demand a pretty high price. So very quickly, the Mexican cartels, the gangs, got onto the idea that they could intercept or start to control this resource and get a pretty steady source of income. Most of the avocados that we consume come from the regions with tremendous amount of cartel and gang influence and conflict because they are trying to control this resource and control its distribution. I don't know where to go with that, except for now that I know about it, I love avocados, and I don't know how to deal with this conflict, because once the system is in place, once people are controlling agricultural resources and then controlling the people who grow them, that's a hard system to get rid of, as we saw with the Irish potato famine, where the English aristocracy controlled all of the wheat and agricultural products and even allowed the population of their workers to starve, despite the fact that there was lots of food available. This is a very common pattern that we see. Control the agricultural resources, you can get a lot of wealth. The other conflict, or the other uncomfortable issue here with specifically avocados from Peru, is most of the avocados from Peru are coming from a region where it's a dry region, and they're diverting the water from a river to irrigate the avocado fields, and the local farmers are no longer able to grow produce. The rivers are running dry, and they don't have access to water for making their own crops just to feed the people within these locations, within the individual cities and villages. And so when I look at this avocado that I know came from Peru, there's a part of my heart that breaks a little bit, because this is Peruvian water. This water should have stayed there for the farmers that need it and for their agricultural crops. I don't necessarily feel comfortable eating their water here in Rockford, Illinois. And even if I eat California avocados, we have a similar situation where the groundwater is being dried up in order to irrigate the avocado trees. So, and then we also have salinization of the soils, as we'll learn about in the agricultural unit, or agricultural chapter. It's just, there's a lot of conflict. Eating food, I don't think, is as straightforward as it used to be in our very globalized situation. And one could argue that our situation, our agricultural system, has been globalized since people first developed ships. Now we're back to chapter 11 at the beginning of the semester, the origin of agricultures. So our Phoenicians started us on the path of trading agricultural products. Those agricultural products taste delicious. I know they do. One of those agricultural products that I love to take advantage of are cashews. And you can see I've got quite a hefty amount of cashews. And the reason why is because I've switched over to a completely vegan diet, and everything is plant-based at this point. And cashews have that perfect balance of saturated lipids and proteins. And so I can supplement some of my proteins, and I can get some of the functionality of saturated lipids and baked goods by using lots of cashews. But I've since started to question whether I should be eating cashews, because I learned recently that most of the cashews that we consume come from India, and that it's mostly women in poor areas who are hand harvesting these. And the dilemma is that when you have to hand harvest the cashews are a drupe fruit, and drupe fruit, as we'll learn about later. And the drupe fruit has a really hard outer endocarp, hard outer shell. You have to crack that shell, and inside of that shell there's a lot of cyanide. And so their hands and their fingers are damaged from being exposed to this really toxic compound in order to get the seed, the cashew seed that so many of us love and adore cooking with. Food systems, they're very conflicted. Now, recently, there has been the advent of, the development of a lot of plant milks to replace dairy milk. And all they're doing is taking the plant product. In the case of soy milk, it's the soy seed. In the case of almonds, it's the almond seed. In the case of oat products, it is the oat seed. They're grinding it up, incorporating it with some water, and potentially some other flavorings, like in the case of this creamer that has vanilla and lots of delicious sugar. And they're adding some water. So it really is just the ground up seed, really finely ground up seed, water, and a couple of other things added to that liquid. So when I looked at the different types of plant milks and I learned about almonds, and how almonds, like avocados grown in California, require a tremendous amount of water, and that they're having irrigation problems on top of a prolonged drought, it made me shift away from drinking almond milk or using almond milk and instead using oats. At least with oats, I know that these grasses can tolerate less water. They require less fertilizer to grow. They're pretty durable plants, and I get a lot more micronutrients and macronutrients. And I did that analysis by comparing the nutrition facts on the side of the label from all of the products and doing some additional research online. So here we see just a sampling of some of the things that can be used to meet our nutritional needs. I hope that you start to read more about where your food comes from, about what your nutritional demands might be. I think one of the things that's a dilemma is that here in the United States and in several other countries, there has been such an emphasis on different diets and dieting. And people tend to get really focused on this, down to the how many carbohydrates and how many proteins and counting the individual numbers that they need to get through every day. And while we do have the calculation of a 2,000 calorie diet or 1,500 calorie diet, the one thing we have to recognize is that there's a lot of variation with humans. We're all different. We all have different biological needs, and those needs are going to shift over the course of our lifespan. So as our bodies started to mature and go through puberty, we might have had a huge craving for lipids. That makes sense. We're producing a tremendous amount of hormones. Hormones are lipids. And as our bodies were gearing up for sexual reproduction, we needed more of those lipids. We needed more of those proteins as we started to develop these secondary sex characteristics, and we started to prepare ourselves to reproduce for the species. When our bodies start to age, we find that we don't need as much protein. We maybe don't need as many lipids. Our dietary demands start to change over the course of our lifespan. So we need to take that into account. It's not going to be consistent from day to day, and it's not going to be consistent over the course of our entire lifespan. We do want to make sure on a daily basis that we're consuming those water-soluble vitamins. Those are the ones that we're going to pee out because the vitamins are attracted to water. So whatever our body doesn't use, it just leaves with the urine. We don't need to consume the fat-soluble vitamins as often because the fat inside of the lipids inside of our body will grab a hold of those vitamins and store them for a period of time. So we can go a little bit longer without consuming some of those fat-soluble vitamins. One of the things that I have seen as a result of this emphasis on dieting and this hyper focus on human nutrition and body image and what our bodies are supposed to look like. One of the things I find disturbing is that we've ignored individual variation. We tend to go for these idealized things, and I don't think that that has been helpful. I think that that has led to some very serious dilemmas. One of the things that we've done is we've tend to make this focus on dietary issues and body image. We've tended to make that more of a woman issue or a female issue. And again, I think we've missed the whole aspect that any human could have issues with body image and what they are consuming and trying to figure out what their body needs. My cousins were into wrestling. And I always thought it was really weird the things that they would do to make weight for the wrestling matches. Everything from taking laxatives to not drinking, and never mind the food issues and what they would and wouldn't eat on a daily basis. Needless to say, they did have and still do have some serious situations with their relationship with food. And this is where we get into people like Michael Pollan trying to address this and trying to say, eat your cravings. If your body is craving something, your body, your cells are saying, hey, I need something. Research what that craving is. Get in touch with it. Try to meet that cellular need. Sometimes when we're craving something like sweets, our body is trying to say, I need protein or I need calcium. And as soon as you get that calcium in your body, as soon as you get a higher level of protein, however you get that protein, sometimes that craving goes away. So we really need to be in tune and listening to ourselves and listening to our body. I have a couple of books here from Michael Pollan if you want to start to walk down that road about our relationship with food. One of his original books that he wrote that got him into writing about food was Omnivore's Dilemma. And this is fantastic. It will give you a really good, really well-researched view into our agricultural system, our historical and current relationship with food. So I would start with Omnivore's Dilemma. He wrote some other books like In Defense of Food, and I like those books, but I feel like they were almost a repetition of what's here in Omnivore's Dilemma. The other book that I strongly recommend is Cooked. This is where he starts to talk about why cooking is so important and how in the use of temperature to change proteins and in the use of fermentation, we can start to bring out more of those micronutrients. So that's why I have Know Me here, which is a great book about fermentation. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole and start fermenting and preserving your own food, highly, highly, highly recommend. But this is going to take you into biology. You're going to become a very good biologist and chemist when you start to do fermentation. And then my other book that I strongly recommend, and these books are on your extra credit reading list, is Twinkie Deconstructed. And what I love about this book is it takes us through how we get something like a Twinkie that could last pretty much indefinitely on the shelf, what we had to do to the chemistry of food. And so in this book, it talks about hydrogenation, taking an oil, forcing that unsaturated lipid, forcing every carbon in that fatty acid chain to take on hydrogen, to make it from kinked to straight, hydrogenating it. And once that fatty acid chain was straight, then it behaved like butter. Then it behaves like coconut oil or lard, all of those saturated lipids that we love in baking and can be used and manipulated in baking. This talks about the origin of things like imitation vanilla, which is based on crude oil, and all of the things that go into something like the Twinkie. Wonderfully researched, really fast to read, and it will give you a lot of insight into some of that processed food that we take for granted and we don't often ask questions about. How did we get this product to occur? Because it wasn't going to occur on its own. And despite as much as we love to bake, most of our baked goods at home are not going to last for years on the shelf. So this is just an overview of human nutrition. Obviously, you can really fall down a rabbit hole learning a lot more about human and cat and dog and bird and all of the animals that we share our lives with what they require as well. As always, please email me if you get any questions.